started getting all this pressure from outside that our songs weren't legitimate, they were lightweight, they were disco, and and your art is, something that's a bit more sensitive than that. Yeah, I don't want a person to walk up on me and say, all you want to do is write a hit. Of course I do, but I mean, on an album of 8 tunes, I feel pretty strongly about at least 7 of them.
I was born in 1970, which means that when disco first came around, I was barely older than a toddler. I mean, Love Train by the OJs was released in 1972. And yeah, disco didn't become the music and dance trend that we all think of until around 1977, but even still, I would have only been in 2nd grade at the time. And I come from a family of musicians that made their living in blues and southern rock, so definitely heard "Disco Sucks" coming from multiple people around me when I was very young. Yeah, we even had the bumper sticker on our 77 tan Dodge Aspen station wagon. It's only been relatively recently that I started looking into things more closely. So let's get into it. Here are the 5 things that I've learned about Chic. When Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards first put the band together in 1972, they were a straight-up rock band called The Boys, but changed the name pretty quick to the Big Apple Band. And how's this for some irony? They had to change their name after Walter Murphy released a fifth of Beethoven because the album was released under the name Walter Murphy and the Big Apple Band. And they didn't want to be confused for that disco band that recorded the Beethoven thing. But it was after attending a show by glam band pioneers Roxy Music that Nile Rodgers formed a vision for what he wanted his band to be, a kind of collective, embodying the peace and love of the hippie movement, but bringing it into the 70s. See, he wanted Chic to be a unit, not a star with a few backing performers. Again, kind of ironic when you consider that most of the hippies were pretty firmly anti-disco. Can you imagine trying to be a peace and love band in the 70s only to catch the most hate from the peace and love crowd from the 60s? Real breakdown in communication in there somewhere. The classic lineup of Chic came together when Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards were able to recruit drummer Tony Thompson from LaBelle. Yep, Rodgers, Edwards, Thompson, that's a hell of a trio right there. For vocals, they added Norma Jean Wright, but her condition was that she could continue to pursue her own solo career as well. That's pretty much what she did. She appears only on the first self-titled album by Chic, but shortly after decided to leave to do her own thing. Ultimately, though, maybe that was a good decision, because even though she left Chic before they had their biggest hits, her solo albums did reasonably well, but beyond that, her voice appears on some really big hits over the next 20 years. Aretha Franklin. Debbie Gibson. Sister Sledge. CNC Music Factory. The last of the original members to join was singer Lucy Martin, and Norma Jean Wright was eventually replaced by Alpha Anderson. And this is the key quintet that you'll see on album covers, TV appearances, and the like. Though the recording sessions involved many, many more musicians, Chic albums had 5 or 6 vocalists, 3 or 4 keyboardists, strings, horns, percussions, 25 people or more on each album. But there are a few other names that come up quite a bit in these early albums. Luther Vandross, for example. His vocals are all over the place on the first couple albums. And Sammy Figueroa on percussion. Alex Foster from the SNL Band on sax. Real People by Chic is one of 4 albums that the team of Rodgers Edwards wrote and produced in 1980. The others being Love Somebody Today by Sister Sledge. King of the World by Sheila and B. Devotion. And Diana by Diana Ross. Upside down, boy, you turn me. And I mean, even in the middle of the anti-disco backlash that had come up strongly in 1980, the team of Rodgers and Edwards were still making chart-topping hits, eventually landing Nile Rodgers in the producer role on Let's Dance by David Bowie, Like a Virgin by Madonna, even that one album by the Honey Drippers. I wanna tell you. Remember them? Chic disbanded in 1983 after 7 studio albums. This included one of the best album names I've heard in a while. Their 1982 release was called Tongue in Chic. But Rodgers and Edwards continued to work together and tour together until one day, just before a show at Budokan in 1986, Bernard Edwards started feeling a bit weak. He did the show, but immediately afterwards he told everyone he needed to rest, went to his hotel, and then died of pneumonia that night. And in 2003, at the age of only 48, Tony Thompson died of kidney cancer. In 2013, after working with Daft Punk on Random Access Memories, public demand for Nile Rodgers and Chic began to rise, so Rodgers put together a new ensemble called Nile Rodgers Chic. They began playing festivals and seriously impressing people with their live set, until eventually they were among the top reviewed acts at places like the Essence Festival and Glastonbury. And they even recorded a new album. It's called About Time. But the release was delayed due to the deaths of both Prince and David Bowie. You know what? Fair. Eventually coming out in 2018 to fairly decent reviews. You want to know what else? Chic has been nominated for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 11 different times, but they still haven't received sufficient votes to be inducted. And that's the 5 things for Chic. Time to give real people a spin. Back soon with First Impressions.
When we first started Chic, when hip-hop first started to develop, and Rappers Delight came on the scene and they were like, stealing our strings and shit. I had a problem with it, and then I realized, somebody sat me down and they educated me and they said, no, when you went to school, everybody was taught music and art as part of the normal curriculum. But now they've cut back on the programs, the government has cut back, and now kids are using the best tools that they have available to create their own art form.
First spin. Here are the 2 things that stand out most to me. First, this is mostly a disco album, but not entirely. The late 70s/early 80s funk thing is definitely happening here as well. And here's the other thing I think I'm hearing. For the most part, the instrumental, production, and arranging and execution portions of what I'm hearing all sound pretty great. But some of the songwriting, especially on the phrasing, both lyrically and instrumentally, some of it can be a touch awkward. The first track is Open Up, an instrumental tune that has strong emphasis on the offbeats of the pickups. That's the A of beats 2 and 4, like this, and 2, and a 3, and 4, and a 1, and 2, and a 3, and 4. A small string section is responsible for the main melody, and that feels very disco. Might be fun to do a workup of this song in which the melody is stated by like a guitar or a Rhodes or something. Just keep everything else the same, just swap out the lead instrument and see what happens. Rhythm section is very, very tight on this one. The next track is Real People.
NBC presents Real People.
And this is easily the most lead guitar I've ever heard from Nile Rodgers. He ain't bad at it either. Changes are nice. Groove is mid-tempo funk. Quite nearly disco even. But the phrasing, yes, this is the first of many spots on the album where I had to kind of wonder if maybe they felt rushed in getting these tunes together.
I'm doggone gonna be with some real people.
I Love You More is a 1970s R&B slow jam. Very shimmery, very smooth. Dr. Marvin Rubdown approved.
I'm Dr. Marvin Rubdown. Did you know that writing love poems is as easy as telling a girl she's hot with the fanciest words you can think of?
So, you can add this one to your special occasions playlist.
I loved you more than...
And this next song is called I Got Protection. If it came out even a year later, that might have been enough to get them canceled. Yeah, but in a year later, they wouldn't have released it. Yep, I believe that's true. But listening with the benefit of hindsight, I mean...
Got protection from your infection.
Fun to hear 7 sharp 9 chords played by a string section, though. Rebels Are We is the most old-school funk song on the album. The Strat sounds great. Solid groove, nice-sounding wah that doesn't take up too much space. And a superb instrumental breakdown about halfway through. A bit awkward in the vocal phrasing, otherwise, yeah, I'd play the hell out of this one at a gig. Similar story for Chip Off the Old Block. I mean, if you heard it at a disco, it wouldn't be out of place, but this is definitely more in the funk camp. Great riff at the intro and in the choruses. 26. This might be peak awkward phrasing on the album.
26, my baby's a 26.
Okay.
On a scale of 1 to 10, my baby's a 26.
Yeah, and they do that like 12 times in the song. Anyway, another slow jam to end the album. You Can't Do It Alone. Slower, anyway, more like the low side of mid-tempo, if that makes sense.
Some need your Katie's gone. You can't do it alone.
Same slickness as I Love You More, same tightness. But one last time, the problem is that the lyrical phrasing feels like a first draft. Like they could have gone back one more time to make the flow as tight as the groove. This would have been amazing. So far, I think this album's a lot of fun, even with the awkwardness. Certainly, this is the most Rodgers and Edwards I've ever consumed all at once. And I'm kind of here for it. Anyway, those are my first impressions. Back soon with final thoughts.
And she says, so darling, what you do is you come to the back door and you knock really hard and you say, I am personal friends of Miss Grace Jones. We had heard all of these rock and roll stories about, you know, like take this M&M color out of the bag and stuff like that and do. So we actually thought that she wanted us to say it like that. We didn't know that that's how she really sounded. So we knock on the back door of Studio 54. Hello, we are personal friends of Miss Grace Jones. And the guy slams the door on our faces. Are there any kids in here? And he says, oh, fuck off.
Y'all, as a kid, I was 100% on the wrong side of history, for this one matter anyway, and I have evidence to prove it, unfortunately. Because check this out. There were a lot of blues and rock musicians who really hated disco. Hated it. Wanted it gone entirely. Put bumper stickers on their cars stating how much they hated it. Wrote songs about how much they hated it.
Disco, disco, disco.
Or to put it in a way that's perhaps needlessly confrontational, white musicians who were playing black music from 20 years ago didn't like the music that black people had come up with since then. No, that's not entirely fair. Because disco was more than just an offshoot of R&B. It was an inclusive, cultural, and artistic phenomenon that welcomed all kinds of marginalized groups. And a lot of the backlash, I think, came from there. But my preteen self? Well, my stepfather was an aspiring blues rock guitarist. And my dad was particularly incensed by the disco movement because for him, it became personal. When Capricorn Records folded in 1980, the Allman Brothers was then signed by Arista Records, who assigned them a new producer named Mike Lawler, who also consequently joined the band as their synth player. Anyway, Mike had marching orders from Clive Davis to modernize their sound. And the results... Bet you didn't know that happened, did you? So yes, I kind of inherited a disco sucks attitude from my family. And honestly, now I feel a bit embarrassed by that fact. But hey, at least it wasn't as bad as the Beatles backlash where people were burning records at big public gatherings, right? I mean, one sure sign that you're on the wrong side of history is when you get folks together to burn stuff.
Many had come for Disco Demolition Night, a promotional gimmick. Between games, as planned, a huge box containing thousands of disco records was blown up.
Ooh. So, yeah, 100%. In 1980, when it came to disco, I was completely on the wrong side of history. No doubt. So what that means for me here and now is that I really want to like this Chic album. I've been bending over backwards all this week trying to see this music in its best possible light. And here are the positive things I can say about what I'm hearing. The execution is flawless. There's not an off note or misbeat anywhere in these 8 tunes. No, more than that, the rhythm section is as tight as any I've ever heard. The sound quality and the engineering are pristine. Nile Rodgers is a damn fine guitarist, both for funk rhythms and for lead. Lucy Martin and Alpha Anderson, both pitch-perfect singers. But for me, the whole thing comes crashing down on songs like Real People and 26 because the very stilted and forced way the main melody and lyrics interact with the rest of the song. There's real genius on this album. Amazing playing and stellar grooves. But there's only so much I can listen to at one time. And honestly, deep down, I see this as a character flaw in myself. So my 5-word overview for Real People by Chic is... No, disco doesn't suck. But now let's see what I'm listening to next week. Rolling for year 2023. chances are real good I will have never even heard of this artist before. Let's see what we get. Here's week and month. Okay, it's in the corner again. It's April, fourth week of April, 2023. And finally, we have our chart position, 1 through 100. Number 4. The number 4 Hot 100 2023. Oh, Princess Diana by Ice Spice and Nicki Minaj. Well, Nicki Minaj I've heard of, but not Ice Spice. Going to be way out of my comfort zone for this one, seems to me. Anyway, the song Princess Diana appears on the album Like, so that's what I'm listening to next. Thanks for hanging out with me, everyone. I'll see you next week.